Welcome back to the last discussion on team defining moments today of the Connected Teamwork Summit Day 1. We're going to talk about making decisions. And with me, I have Jill Meyers, a licensed pilot, private pilot since age 17, amongst many other things. I'll say more about Jill in a second. How are you doing today, Jill?
I'm great, Hilke. It's great to be on with you again.
Same here, same here. It seems like yesterday
It
we meet
does.
on these screens. This is great. And so we're going to have a conversation with Jill about how do we create connectedness when we make decisions. A few things about Jill, besides that she's a licensed pilot since a little while ago. She's more than 40 years of experience in aviation and aerospace, including 8 years in the US Air Force and 30 years as an aerospace engineer, program manager, and business leader. He's also a independent management consultant for 6 years and holds now a senior leadership position at an engineering services company that supports, again, something to do with the aerospace, transportation, and national security industries. Besides all this work, Jill is very busy in outreach and mentoring of the people that are girls and women that want to consider STEM education. And she's been doing this for more than 20 years, lots of decades here. She's been honored by the Royal Aeronautical Society in London and is the recipient of the National Aeronautics Association's 22 Catherine Wrights Trophy, and acknowledging her for her 40 years of dedication to the aerospace industry and her tireless commitment as a volunteer and role model, working to educate and inspire young girls around the globe. I think that says it very well. One of the things I love about Jill is her incessant curiosity and willingness to think about things deeply, and her willingness to embrace herself and others in the process, helping people find their place in the world. So yes, Jill, let's talk about this topic of making decisions. So
Yes.
what have you learned about connectedness and making decisions?
Well, it's the core of it, really, if you ask me. I have brought into all of the organizations I've worked for this concept that not only does everyone have a voice, which is a fairly standard phrase you hear, but too many organizations don't connect all of the people to make a decision that need to be involved. They always think that you just go to the one expert, or such and such organization doesn't have to have a part of it. And it's just really not the way to do it. A lot of the public speaking I do is about using, as you know, women in aviation as a platform, but talking about how important it is to have a variety of people in an organization, on the board of directors, what have you. And it's for the well-known reason that different people with different backgrounds, whether it's cultural, gender, what have you, they all bring a different perspective, and you need all of those perspectives to make a decision. And it's just overlooked a lot. And there's not always, at a lot of places I've been, there's just an assumption that the fewer number of people that you get involved in making a decision makes it easier. And I
Mhm.
have actually found the opposite.
Mm.
Because, just as like super easy examples, as an engineering manager, you are often processing changes to your program. The customer comes to you and says, I really don't like it blue. I'd rather have it green. And you're already done the product, right? So, do you make that change or not? Well, it's not just a management decision of the engineering management or the program management. You need the finance people in there. You need the contracts people in there. You need the people that would actually have to do the work to change the color. There's, the common term is stakeholders, but most people, I think, falsely think of stakeholders as only people above them.
Mm.
Senior leadership, they must be the stakeholders because they run the company. Well, no, what about the people that it impacts at, any level of the company? And that's just overlooked a lot. So, I'm a huge fan of connecting as many people as possible to make sure that you really do make the right decision for
Mm.
everyone. Now, not everyone's going to be happy all the time, of course. You can't
Yeah.
reach that very often,
Yeah.
but at least you at least the person who has the responsibility to make the decision, they really need as many inputs as possible. So they're really
Mm,
educated about impact and possibilities and alternatives, which don't often
mm,
get discussed. So
mm.
the more people you involve, I think the better off decision making gets.
Can you give an example, Jill, of how that has played out in your career and life? Can you give an example of where you may have learned to include more or less less people in the decision, and like how did you create connectedness with the people around you that way?
I'll give you a I'll give you an example where it didn't go well because it was a learning moment for my whole organization. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes something bad to happen before people will kind of wake up. But I was at, I guess I can name them because they're always in trouble anyway. I was at Boeing way back when I was at a very special part of Boeing that was an organization of about 700 people that were trying to do something that had never been done before. You're going to laugh, which was put Wi-Fi on an airplane for passengers to get online. This was way back. And I was on another program at Boeing, and a vice president came to me and my boss one day and said, tomorrow morning, you two are going to go over here and fix this mess of this program. So we went over there, and I immediately noticed that the engineering department was split into three distinct buckets. There were people who put the equipment on the aircraft, the wireless access points, the whole bit. There were a group of people that leased time and space on the satellites where we would bounce the signals off of. And there were people who updated and maintained ground stations all over the world. And that's just how the signals routed. So our launch customer was Lufthansa in Germany, and we had it installed on, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 aircraft. And Lufthansa called us one day and said, we don't know what's going on. All of the systems are down. Nothing's working. Passengers are not happy. Like, what the heck? So my boss and I went and did some digging, and we found out that the people who are in charge of the ground stations were asked to make a change to the software and didn't think they had to tell anybody. So this is a massive integrated worldwide network. They flew to Switzerland, which is where this one happened to be located. They updated the software, didn't tell the people who had the equipment on the airplane, and everything stopped working. And it was, and they basically just said, we don't ever talk to those people. We don't need them to help make decisions. It's like, well, yeah, you do. So, that was one example where something had to go really badly for the organization to understand. And then something that we implemented then, which I've tried to bring into especially startups that I've worked for, who tend to work a lot more on the fly. They don't want to be a Boeing. They don't want to become, a behemoth process intensive organization, but there's a middle ground. So there's a concept for, there's a method for decision making that has worked in a lot of places, big and small. And it's commonly in engineering called a change control board. And I actually just introduced this at my current company, which is relatively small. And of course, they immediately, pretty much everyone sort of balked at it at first and then said, well, maybe we'll think about that someday. So basically, a change board, you put together for a given organization the minimum number of stakeholders. So as I said before, you always have someone from finance and someone from engineering and someone from the business side, one of each basically. And then the person who wants a change done or needs a decision of any kind made, whether it's to add more money or change schedule or change technical requirements or whatever the change is, you bring everyone together. The person comes in and presents the decision that needs to be made. Everyone hears it at the same time. They can ask questions. You can hear each other's questions. What a concept. And really come to a good decision. And again, usually on a change board, there's a chair of that board, possibly a vice chair, and they have ultimate decision authority. But again, Hilke, it's a way to fairly easily, in a streamlined fashion with a process defined,
Mm.
Bring the right people in the room, get everyone's opinion, and then you have an educated basis from which to make that decision.
Very clear. Very clear. I'm thinking about how Jill makes decisions in her life and how you
Not
practice
well.
this and how you practice this principle of involving stakeholders.
Yeah.
And you know, how many what are the right stakeholders? Like, how do you make sure it doesn't become like overly cumbersome?
That's a good question. And it's funny, I've talked to a few people recently when I've said, it's funny that Hilke wants me to talk about decision making because on a personal level, I'm pretty bad at it. Every single person I've said it to said, no, you are amazing at making decisions because you make them at the time with the best information you have, like always.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be the right decision down the road, in hindsight. But the way I make it's funny. So as a fairly anal engineer, I used to make personal decisions with spreadsheets and weighted columns. Like I used to go really nuts with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it never worked for me. I used it as an excuse to say, well, this is why I'm picking job A over job B, because my spreadsheet tells me it's a better answer,
Right.
which is crazy because it ignored all the emotional side of it, first of all. And a lot of people say you should make, business decisions without emotion, but you really can't do that, especially if it's your own life. So what I've done, and I talked a little bit about this, I think in our last podcast, is someone shared with me a concept several years ago of having a personal board of directors. So for my personal career decisions, there's a few people I always check in with who've known me for a long time, one of them for sure. And, they don't really say, Jill, you should do A and not B, but they give me different perspectives of theirs for me to think about. And they know me so well, and they've seen me make prior decisions, good or bad. So for business decisions, like, do I take a new job? Do I do consulting or direct work, which is always a struggle for me between those two in the last 10 years or so. I just really think about what's the most important to me. I do try to figure out what my priorities are, which to be honest, isn't always easy. So, in a given year, compensation might be more important to me than the exact job. I never care about title and level. I just want to really love what I'm doing and be passionate about it. And then personal decisions are a little harder. I've moved a lot since I left the military. It was just sort of in me to move every 3 years. So I kind of still do that all these decades later. And I guess I have my own personal group of people, my best friend in the world has been my best friend since we met the first day of 9th grade. His name's Jeffrey. Jeffrey and I have been, extremely close all these, I don't know how many years that is, a lot of years. And, you go to someone who's known you since you were 13, 14, and he's seen me navigate through my entire crazy life. And, he's usually the first one I'll just go to and really ask for guidance if it's a personal question. And then I'm very close to my older sister. We grew up together and she's 2.5 years older. So, Vicky's always so Vicky and Jeffrey are like my main go-to people because they just know me so intimately well. And they have, we have obviously a close enough relationship where they can just tell me if I'm out of my mind. They can just look at me and say, you are crazy. What are you thinking? And I appreciate that kind of honesty from them, and I have some newer people in my life that I've known for, I have 2 really good friends here that I consult with all the time. They're both amazing, amazing women. But I try to get, sort of to my business point earlier, Hilke, I try to get different people's perspectives, so people who've known me a long time, people who maybe don't know me that well and see me in a different light, because again, everyone has a slightly different perspective. So you don't want to only go to people who've known you your whole life. Right. So I do try to get a mix of perspectives from different people, whether it's a personal decision or a work one.
I love this idea of having a personal board of directors for your life and then also for your work. We're going to take a short break in a moment. And then after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about How do you choose who you give a vote to? Be back after the break. All right. So, who do you give a vote to? Like, let's say your best friends are saying things that are totally contrary to what you think. What happens?
I actually like when that happens because it makes me think harder, So when I want to do so, and this has happened several times, even recently, when I'm really gung ho about doing whatever it is, whether it's, moving or whatever, if someone who knows me well, and even if they don't know me long term, but if I trust them implicitly, which is number one criteria, if they just look at me and say, I think you're on the completely wrong path and this is why, it's really helpful to me because number one, I don't want everyone to agree with me all the time. That's super boring. But I just like people who have enough wherewithal, enough strength to debate with me about it, because sometimes they'll bring up something I didn't think of. More often, though, to be honest, they will bring up things that I've already thought about and have tried to discard on my own. And then they bring it back forward and put it in front of me and say, no, you really need to think about this, So getting that challenge.
I can't help but interrupt you because I want to hear, can you give us an example of how this, can you give us an example? Maybe it's in the way back past, so it may not be as vulnerable or fresh or sensitive, but maybe can you give us an example of how you looked at it? Because I think it's really helpful for us to hear that.
I will give you an example from way back when, because it's the first thing I always give you, Hilke, the first thing that comes into my head. So I quit college on a full scholarship and decided to join the Air Force, or was thinking about deciding to join the Air Force. And so I was 19 at the time. I had done one semester at college, full ride. My scholarship escalated every year as the costs went up, and I just decided I didn't want to do that. Felt very much having a lack of direction and just quit. Really upset everybody. And I started working at a department store as the manager of the juniors department in a department store in Phoenix, Arizona. And one of the people who worked in our department brought in an Air Force brochure one day because she had gone to talk to a recruiter. And it had never crossed my mind. I had never met anyone in the military. I never saw anyone in uniform in my entire life. It was completely foreign to me. And I'm reading the brochure and I'm like, I could go back to college someday and they'd pay for it. I can travel the world. I can get the heck out of the house because I had moved back home like an idiot. And so I went to my, at the time, personal board of directors, right, at 19. And most people were like, you are out of your mind. Like, what are you doing? And my favorite comment was from my grandmother, who said, nice Jewish girls don't go in the military, Jill. Thank you, Grandma. And my parents were very, didn't understand what I was doing. My friends at school were just like, you are nuts. And it was just not something that my crowd did. My crowd wasn't a group of people going off to join the military. But there was something in me that just constantly said, I want to finish college. I don't have any money to do it now. I want to travel the world. And this is a way to do it without paying for it. And as you mentioned, I got my pilot's license when I was 17 and I wanted to be around airplanes. And I'll be totally honest with you. I got some support from my father. My parents were divorced. So my mother and stepfather were like, yeah, no. My real dad was supportive, shockingly, because he's an amazing man. If he's listening, hi, Dad. And, but the person who really, interestingly, the only person in my family who was supportive at all was my dad's brother, my uncle. My uncle, he passed away a couple of years ago. My uncle was a very out there, said whatever was on his mind. Like he drove my grandparents crazy. But he kind of understood me. We had a really close relationship when I was a teenager. And literally, I remember sitting in a restaurant with him and explaining to him that I wanted to join the military. And he was the only one who said, I think it's an amazing idea. I think this is why. I think you should tell the rest of the family to go whatever. I won't use swear words on your podcast. And he was like the only person who really made me feel or helped me feel like it was a good idea. And I just felt like he understood me better than at the time anyone in my family. And he really gave me the courage to go do it, which is really interesting. And of course, once I went in, I loved it. But that was a time when my own normal default personal board of directors were all like, nope, nope, nope.
No.
You're a mistake. You're going to hate it. It's going to hate you. And then the one guy that I just felt a real personal bond with, my uncle, he's like, I think it's amazing. And I think you're very brave. And I think you ought to do it.
Amazing. Amazing. Tell us about, how did you then choose to give your uncle a vote and not the rest? How did that happen?
I think it was because, I think it just started pouring rain outside. I think it's because I had always felt a close connection with him, and not that I didn't with everyone else that I talked to, but he just framed it in such a way that it just gave me, as I said, the courage to just make my own decision.
Right.
And everyone else came to me with more of it's not what you should do because it's not what's expected of a 19-year-old Jewish girl. I mean, I just kept hearing that over and over again from my family. Not that has anything to do with not joining the military, but I just always felt like my whole teenage years, from when I was literally 12, 13, his name was Sydney. I always felt that Sydney understood me better than anyone in my family. He was the only one who would just, like, we were at a big, again, there's a lot of swearing involved, but we were at a big dinner one night this is my dad's side of the family. We were at a big dinner one night in a restaurant with my dad and my grandparents, my dad's second wife, my sister, and Sydney. And everyone started yelling at each other because my grandparents, my grandmother yelled a lot. So they were like yelling at this restaurant. And can I swear on your show? Is that allowed?
Go ahead.
So my sister and I are looking at each other, and everyone's looking at each other. And the yelling was just ongoing. And Sydney just stood up and said, would everyone just shut the fuck up? And everyone else in the restaurant looked, and my whole family just got total quiet. I was like, yay, Sydney. He was just like, he could settle anything. He could go right to the root of stuff. And it was, so I just had that bond with him because I was kind of the same way. I was very mouthy and said what was on my mind, and still do. And he and I just sort of had that in common. So, I took in everyone's perspective, but the people who were telling me, no, you shouldn't, didn't really have a reason, except that I was Jewish. It's like, well, that's not a reason.
I hear you. I hear how your uncle was able to frame the root of the issue for you, and that is probably an important part of connected decision making, where we're able to get to the roots of it, and that resonates. My sense is there's some truth that resonates. It's like, yep, that's it. Even when he spoke about the restaurant, yep, that's it. He's truth spoken that has gravitas, that has a clang to it. So therefore, it will lead to decisions. We are getting toward the final minutes of our conversations.
Already,
it's going fast. So I'm going to ask you this to give us some practical tip for a person that doesn't have a personal or professional board of directors. What would you say to them? Where to start? What to do?
Well, I would say that it would be helpful to build one. And, when I first heard that term many years ago and thought about, well, who would my board of directors be? I immediately jumped to the people who first had historically provided me incredible guidance and I felt knew me really well and could be really honest with me. And as I said, I think in our last interview, an amazing woman named Krista in New England has been the head of my board of directors, the chair of my board for over 10 years now. But I think if you just stop and think about your inner circle, which is what some people call it, if you think about your inner circle and the people that you most, think about the people that if you have a really hard decision to make and you don't know what to do, usually there's a couple people you'll pick up the phone and call. So just sort of think through your normal, think about what you've done in recent years when you've had a really hard decision. Who do you reach out to? Who do you ask advice from? That is your personal board of directors, I think, whether you call it that or not. I just named Krista as the chair of my board because she is probably one of the few people who gives me equally amazing perspective and guidance, both personally and professionally. So when I'm making a job decision, she'll bring in personal things she knows about me, whether it's what she knows I like and don't like. She knows why I have taken or left prior jobs. So she provides like the full package of guidance, and everyone else kind of has a slice of it. But like I said, I think everyone could easily just sit back and think about who are the first 4 people you pick up the phone and ask advice from. And very likely that's your personal board, and you can change it over time. When I moved to New Mexico almost 5 years ago and met these 2 incredible women I met them through work, and now they're like my 2 best friends here. They've become members of my board, and they don't know me as long as the others. But I think, again, that's good because they've only seen me in recent years, and they have a different perspective on my history and my abilities and all that. So kind of mixing up your board with, again, people with different knowledge of you, I think is helpful too. Kind of that same concept of getting a variety of inputs from people with different backgrounds and different thought processes and different feelings of things.
I'm going to take this with me, Jill. This creation of a personal board of directors for decisions. I think it's such a rich way. We start this day today as we're wrapping up these first 6 team defining moments at the Connected Teamwork Summit with yours. I think it's such a beautiful form to bring people together, because our ego self always thinks, I have to do this by myself, and my, bigger self is actually, like you're saying, is reaching out. We learned that from you today. We learned from Carson to the value of appreciation and seeing each other. We learned from Erwin about setting goals that help us to get untied from our own limitations. We learned from Matt about the value of actually being truthful and setting a higher purpose in creating safety around being truthful. We learned, I have to look at my sheet here because there was so much learning today. We learned from Vignesh about the sapling trees that create deep roots first and not race to the top. So that groundedness and helping others to find that for themselves to be of service. We learned from Christine, really making sure we take time for ourselves and have that compassion and kindness are a resource that is underused and underutilized also to ourselves. And we're just finishing this with a conversation with Jill Meyers, who is a private pilot licensed since age 17, an aerospace guide for many people, and a STEM promoter for girls and young women and other things, really believing in the human potential. And she's helping us to understand the value of having a personal board of directors. Thank you so much, Jill, for being with us today. Anything else you want to say by way of closing?
No, just I wish everyone well, and just make sure you have a good community around you, regardless of what you label it.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jill. We're going to close our sessions now on YouTube and LinkedIn, and we're going to move to Zoom. You'll see the links in the chat windows right now, where we'll have an interactive dialogue for the last half hour of today to look at our learnings from today, what we learn about connectedness, and then tomorrow we'll resume bright and early at 8:30 and look at the final 6 team-defining moments that build connectedness. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on Zoom.